Welcome to the Post-Burnout Growth podcast, real talk with me, Ali, and Avril. Real conversations, unscripted, unedited, and in the spirit of showing up and just sharing our experience with burnout with you in the hope that it helps you feel less isolated and alone and gives you the encouragement to take those much needed forward steps towards well-being. Hey, Avril.
Hello. Hey, Ali, it's good to be here. How are you?
Yeah, good, good, good.
So, in the spirit of, helping our listeners feel less isolated and also reflecting on the journeys you and I might have had, but also from the work we do with our coaching clients in the personal growth work we've done, um, I wanted to sort of draw our attention today, if we could talk about finding friendship and community, either when you're navigating burnout or when you're coming through the other side. So you're either in the process of healing and recovery. And the reason I wanted to sort of kick off a conversation about that today is often enough, and this was my experience when we are in the thick of it, in the thick of burnout, we may not even know we're there. And so for a while, we're thinking, I'm just tired. I'm so overwhelmed. I feel stuck. There's a lot on, all of these different things. It's like an emotional roller coaster combined with the physical, emotional fatigue, all of this happening. Um, my own experience was I started to feel like I needed to fix this myself. And so that sense of isolation came from, of course, I can do this. I've got to do this on my own. But I also started to notice, reflecting now, that I was isolating myself from others, um, at work, in my closest relationships. Um, and I think there was definitely a pattern around not letting other people see the actual burn, the fire that was on the outside. I don't think anybody would have guessed what was happening, and that was on for a few years. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about, finding community and friendship and the power of that sense of connection within ourselves, but
Mm,
especially when we have supportive community around us and safe people around us, as we're kind of bringing through burnout. So, what does that kind of, listening to my little experience there, um, what does that bring up for you? What's familiar to you?
yeah. I guess quite a few things, but the first thing when I was listening to you, I had this really loud voice in my head go, "Yep, you're the master at withdrawal." So I think the withdrawal can be obvious and unobvious ways in which we pull back. That, as I said, might be obvious and unobvious to others as well as to ourselves. And so I generally like my own company, and I don't feel like I have to be with others in order
Hmm.
to be contented and happy and such like. But there's a difference when you withdraw from having contact with others, um, turning up for events socially to meet friends, spend time with friends. You just literally kind of shrink yourself away, is part of almost like self-preservation, automatic kind of, you know, somewhat defense response to perhaps the experience that you're having, not really realizing what is the experience you're having. So you maybe only
Mm.
see the symptoms and you're not fully aware of what's actually causing that withdrawal. And yet then you've got the kind of more unseen withdrawal to others, whereby you might be showing up and you might look like you're super high functioning and, but inside you've withdrawn within yourself. You're not perhaps as much yourself in terms of your energy, in terms of your mental engagement, in terms of your appetite, in terms of your enthusiasm.
Mm.
Or those interactions with others. So they maybe don't notice it just as much, but you have a physical sense, in my experience, like in your heart space and your chest space of like pulling back, withdrawing, closing up. So yeah, so that brought up quite a lot for me.
Spot on. All of the words. I loved, well, yes, I loved when I heard when you said the words self-preservation. I recognized that in my own experience. Although I will say, feels like language I have now to um to give language to that experience now, but I didn't have those words then. I didn't think of that as a defense mechanism, the withdrawing, the um sort of just trying to get over this all by myself. Um, I also liked what you said about kind of, those little nudges of I don't want to hang around with my friends anymore, or I don't want to go to the things that, and that's just an example, but I think what we drew my attention to is that broader topic of, or the theme that was for me, the things that give me joy and pleasure, people that I really enjoy being around. Like it was this sort of cutting off of oxygen almost, with the things and the places and the hobbies that I really used to love and enjoy. And I didn't at first notice that that was one of like the ways in which my inner sense of self, my energy was sort of depleting. And instead of actually, and I know this comes as part of the burnout recovery process, at least it was for me, instead of running towards the very things that are life-giving, in terms of running towards those very relationships and spaces that could nurture me, I was pulling further and faster away. Um, in light of what you've been sharing, Ali, can I ask if you would love to share with our listeners, like what was the sort of starting point from you? Because one of the things we want to share with our listeners is like how they can begin to even think of taking those tiniest steps forward, in some way. And so in terms of finding their own sense of community, in sense of finding your own friendship, how do you even begin to do that? Like what was in your experience, like your starting point?
Good question. Um, I'm trying to think about the first time that I burned out. I really hugely withdrew, and experienced, my body was basically talking to me in the form of illness as a result. And unfortunately, it was probably the illness that was the first prompt or the first starting point to evoke some kind of awareness that actually something's not right and
Mm,
I'm not in a good space. And actually, I don't see an end to this feeling, other than between not maybe feeling good within myself, but physically, my health was almost like, a car that's kind of spluttering along. And you
mm,
have that sense, almost like a visceral sense again of that weightedness, that dragging down, that low energy, low vibration that you kind of get tired of being tired, basically. You get tired.
yes.
It's not tiredness like regular tiredness. It's like, it's a different, and it's to your point earlier, you said about often we don't really recognize what's happening and all of the different factors, but it's having
Mm,
the words to articulate what's happening is
mm,
actually a really key point. Yes, I could articulate what was physically not happening with me,
mm,
that, from a health standpoint. And that probably, again, is not the place I would like for other people to start, but it is the reality for many of us, is
mm,
that you reach some kind of breaking point or you reach that I'm tired of being tired. You want to feel different, especially when there's not that sense of a light at the end of the tunnel or an end in sight, or you just feel a sense of lack of control as well because you're so exhausted. I think that's probably one of the other things that I think that I just generally started to reach out to others to, I mean, even as simple as saying yes to a social engagement and
mm,
forcing myself to go out to switch up my energy and be in somebody else's company and to therefore step out of how I was feeling for a little bit, even if that was me pushing myself through those last dregs of energy that I had. It was also enough of a catalyst to open up more conversations and
mm,
also the courage. it kind of almost sort of fuels the momentum of opening up and going, actually, I need to speak to someone
Yeah,
to try and make sense of all of this. Um, and that's not to sound bleak in any shape or form, but it very much was my reality.
sure. Thank you for sharing that. There's a great deal of vulnerability there in action. I love that. Thank you for sharing so transparently. Um, and I know that so many of our listeners will find little nuggets of reflection and resonance and the sense of familiar, which is really why we're having these conversations, aren't we? To help
Mm.
people um, know that, what's happening within themselves or what they might be finding reflected in their reality. So whether they're at work and, use the words high functioning, sometimes there's all of this burn happening on the inside, but on the outside, we seem like, to use the words, perfectly productive and hustling and generating all of these results, but a sense of sort of shallow, hollow, um, I want to be careful here, not hopelessness, but an emptiness. It's like I'm doing all of this, but I'm not sure how I feel. Um, what you've shared that resonates with me as well, and I think that was for me as well that starting point of I really need some help here.
Mm.
Um, and I think and we can talk about this in future conversations as well. I think for me, one of that big pieces that I can now share from being on this side in post-burnout growth and post-traumatic growth is really learning that skill of asking for and being okay with receiving help.
Yep.
Because it's one thing to ask for, and then it's another thing to go, it's probably going to feel so uncomfortable to let another person or persons in to see this because I will share from my experience transparently. I had been conditioned to act and behave in ways which is this is me. I am the strong and independent person. I can do all of the things by myself, overachieve, etc. And so
Mhm.
when it came to burnout really blew the lid off of these patterns not helpful at
Mm.
all. So yeah, I think for me as well, I would say the learning to ask for help. And there's one thing I wanted to tag on there. It sort of jumped at me as you were speaking, which is we had to learn who to ask for help.
Mm.
Because in that place of uh, the slow burn and then eventually the place of where it started to become serious illness and health issues, I think there was definitely a desperation for I want to tell everybody, I want to tell everyone how I feel. I want everyone to believe me that something's really wrong. But when I reflect back on my experience, I probably what I needed and wanted at that point was to find my one or two people who were my space of safety, within myself as well, and just have those one or two people go, okay, here's how we take the next steps forward. So yeah, asking for and receiving help, but also knowing who to ask for. There's no right or wrong way. I can say that with a lot of compassion now. We each navigate our path based on, the resources and the choices we have. We know these conversations will, go across geographies and across different types of groups and kinds of jobs people have. So every one of us will be coming to our specific burnout journeys with a set of resources that we have either inherited or acquired through our lifetimes, but also in terms of what's available to us in the moment, whether that is financially or it's in terms of the people or in terms of the cultural context that we find ourselves in. So I think I just want to share that as we begin to take steps forward, um, we're not running some race to get to the other side of burnout. If anything, it's just that first step, the next step, and then building forwards from there.
Mm.
Um, I'd love to continue our conversations on finding community and friendship um, in the aftermath burnout. And we'll continue to, maybe this will become a series and we can start to do more and bring in some of our other friends and other experts in their own fields to this conversation. As we start to wind down and close out, Ali, is there anything you'd like to offer from your post-burnout growth wisdom for our listeners?
It's actually kind of building upon some things that you said there is about having withdrawn as we started this session about withdrawing as being one of the signs that we may or may not notice at the beginning and kind of turning off the tap to then turning on the tap to
Mm.
actually acknowledge and express our feelings, even if we can't make sense of them, even if we don't have the language to fully make sense and articulate to somebody else about what we think's happening. It can be
Mm.
extremely scary for all of those reasons because there's so many unknowns in just that. So back to your question earlier about where did I start? Um, whilst I might have had the catalyst of physical bodily symptoms being a bit of the catalyst, it's about just honoring yourself and your feelings and
Mm.
acknowledging them, perhaps to yourself again in some shape or form that's meaningful or supportive to you. A really obvious one might be journaling, just to write your thoughts and feelings out on paper to help you make
Mm-hmm.
sense of them, to by way of building up courage to actually maybe turn that tap back on and actually express it and talk to someone. And I think that asking for help gets banded around in so many different contexts, whether we talk about burnout or something else.
Mm-hmm.
Asking for help is just not that straightforward.
Mm.
So it comes back round full circle again, I think, to some of the sentiments you shared right at the start about withdrawing from others, but withdrawing from ourselves and disconnecting from ourselves. So, can we begin by trying to reconnect from ourselves through, just taking some quiet moments to check in about what feelings do we have? And as I said, you don't have to be an expert or have all the words, but just get a pen and paper and just allow yourself to express whatever comes up for you. Just take
Yeah,
that micro step, even if it seems like it might be futile. I promise you it's not.
yeah. I love that. I love that. Those are some really solid, tangible ways in which to sort of start to get a sense of moving forwards as well, when we can do that one thing for ourselves. Um, I also wanted to sort of circle back and close with what you've said around the asking for help isn't straightforward. And what I wanted to share in that space as well is some of us do have people in our lives that are more than there for us, that are more than available to us. It could be a best friend, it could be your GP, it might be you're thinking about asking someone else, it could be a mentor that you have at work, it could be a therapist. So I think what I want to share from my experience, and especially if you're in this place where you're feeling alone, to what Ali was saying, be present with yourself, listen to those nudges. And if you feel called to take that action, take that action. Um, there are no right or wrong ways to approach this. But if you feel called to move forwards in some ways, I'm going to say from where I'm standing right now, go for it. And you will start to build. And if that person can't help you, they might move you towards someone who can. So burnout can leave us feeling very isolated. It can have us believing lots of different lies about what it means to be strong or to be resilient or to be deserving of or worthy of help. But yes, just as you start to kind of become present with your experience, know that you are absolutely worthy of all the help, of all the love and belonging. And if you feel called to act in any way and to ask for help from any specific person,
Mm,
definitely go ahead and do it. So, as we
mm.
wind down this conversation, Ali, thank you so much for your time and energy and for everything that you've shared today with our listeners. You're listening to the Post Burnout Growth podcast, Real Talk with Ali and me, Avril. And this is our corner of the world where we have unedited and unscripted conversations about burnout, and making that journey through to the other side. If you loved what you listened to, definitely follow us. And we'd love to have you back as we continue to have these conversations. If you know someone who would benefit from this conversation, feel free to share this episode with them. I will look forward to having you again with us soon. Bye for now.
See you next time.